Welcome to What's Your Signal, the podcast exploring how today's enterprises connect people, places, and things. You're joined by me, Taylor Walker, and my co-host, Mauricio Stefan. Hey, Mauricio.
Hi, Taylor. How's it going?
It's going pretty good. I'm excited about our episode today because we're diving into just some different use cases about primary wireless. And so for many organizations, cellular technology has long been the core of network resilience, a lot of times for failover. But there's a growing number of businesses that are really leveraging cellular as their primary method of connectivity because it's often cheaper, it's more flexible, it's scalable, and especially as 5G becomes more prevalent in the enterprise, the low latency and the increased bandwidth really provide these kinds of organizations with the flexibility and scale that they need to run a lot of critical business applications across their enterprise.
Yeah, I think, going back to, probably like 5-10 years ago, right, organizations were utilizing a lot of leased line, right, because they felt like they needed that leased line, that T1, MPLS, T3, that kind of stuff to really be able to get that consistent performance that they needed out of their WAN networking source. And, that was kind of the advent of SD-WAN, was the ability to not have to utilize that high-priced lease line and start to aggregate more broadband, consumer broadband together to create a leased line type infrastructure. But now with, now moving into the later days of 4G and 5G, cellular is becoming just as good as those wired consumer broadband technologies as far as the performance and the latency. And so it's leading a lot of customers to choose it as a primary connection because you can't always get a wired line, or in the days of that aging infrastructure where that wire line may be limited by have limited bandwidth because it is older infrastructure that can't be upgraded. Mm-hmm. And so in order to get the bandwidth that they need, they have to turn to cellular. If you are opening a new store or opening a new location or something along those lines, and there's a lot of things to do there. So you may have forgotten to get that wired connection scheduled to be installed. So cellular gives the opportunity to turn your store up on time, mm-hmm. while, potentially waiting for that wired connection. Or some people are experiencing a good enough performance on the cellular that they just choose not to spin up that wired line and just stick with cellular as primary.
Absolutely. And today we're talking with some Ericsson sales reps about customers who have really overcome connectivity and security and operational challenges by implementing cellular WAN. And our first story is from Patrick Bales, who's going to start by telling us about what his customer does.
They provide services to the healthcare industry. So that's anywhere from customer acquisition, where they do like the Google reputation management stuff, to in the physician offices, where they'll provide the digital signage you see when you're sitting in a waiting room, or even in the doctor's office when you'll see like a digital touch screen where they can kind of show you what's going on with whatever they're trying to show you. And now they're starting to get into remote care management. So the networking challenges they were facing were primarily around access to, it was kind of twofold, but access to a network drove both of them. When I say twofold, it means when they're trying to do a POC, right, trying to get access to a customer's network to prove their stuff was an issue. So this allowed them to kind of go out there, demo it easily and quickly. The other piece was physicians and healthcare networks. They just don't want you on their network like most, right? So that was kind of the challenge facing those guys. So they looked at different options, right? They chose us primarily because of NetCloud Manager at the end of the day. It's just an easy way for a lean IT team to manage so many different customers at multiple locations across the country. The benefits they've seen, they've seen operational improvements, obviously. They immediately realized those with the use of the NCM groups, right? Mm-hmm. So it allows them to configure and deploy very easily, so they could kind of scale and then streamline their deployments. Think some of these customers, these physicians would have maybe one office, two offices. Some are going to have significantly more than that. This was a revenue driver at the end of the day. This was a cost for them, but they essentially couldn't sell this service without some way to roll this out.
Yeah.
So this obviously went into their productivity as well, and then time and cost savings. And when I say that, I'm talking about the ability to manage these things remotely. Cost savings was reducing truck rolls, and then also providing their customers with a better experience, right? The shortened time to resolve problems. They've got currently the way they're architected is they're using LTE routers. They're pushing out updates, and when you go into as a waiting room as an example, you're going to look at the screen and you're going to see, maybe the local weather or whatever that physician wants you to see. With the whole goal of driving the conversation between the patient and the physician. But you're also going to see some of the pharma. The medicines or whatever you might need, and so you're a captive audience for this, and that's actually who funds these.
Oh.
So the physicians don't even actually pay for this solution. It's funded by the advertisers. So so currently they're using just LTE routers. We've talked to them about using 5G and maybe connecting multiple because they connect via Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
So yeah. No,
Awesome.
That's about it. That's all I can think of.
So, Mauricio, one of the things that we talked about a bit in the intro is the ability to stand up these networks really quickly. And for this particular healthcare client, one thing that stood out to me is that they needed a way to not only actually run the network or set it up quickly for the customer once that customer decided to use their service, but also to test it. And that's something that I don't think about too often, and that I think is important for enterprises to consider is if you're selling a solution to another business and it requires connectivity, you can't ask that business necessarily to let you use their network or let you use their connectivity or install a wire line so that we can just show you and then hope you'll buy it. No, you've got to have a way to just show them, and wireless and cellular connectivity is really how they get there.
Yeah, I think this one was very interesting too in that how they really work to capture the how they work to fund it in a different way, right? Is looking at alternative sources of funding, right? In that they look towards their vendors to kind of fund this as a digital signage opportunity within their lobby to kind of advertise to the patients, but then being able to leverage it as well for the benefit of the patients, right? Instead of the old school way of just slapping the x-rays up on a light board there and showing them what their results were, they have the ability to, show that digitally and be able to move around between, x-ray results and other lab results to kind of streamline the interaction with the patient to give them that kind of, best-in-class service.
And one thing that I think is interesting too is, often when we're talking about cellular WAN with like a medical purpose, a lot of time we think of ambulances, but we don't talk a ton about how it looks in an actual healthcare facility. And the way that they have this set up in the case of like Patrick's customer, it's a good proof of concept for other things too, for them to think about how they can expand on other ways to use cellular connectivity. So for example, they were able to see how quickly they could put together a proof of concept using a cellular network. Could they also use that then for a pop-up clinic or like a blood drive? Or could they also use that for, a clinic within a store or like telehealth visits and that sort of thing? Like my hope is that it gives that healthcare customer some ideas of how else they can integrate cellular as a means to connect to their patients faster.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely, hopefully, spurs some of that imagination on how to bring that healthcare closer to the community, out into the community, where it'd be easier to service, different parts of the community.
One thing too that is so important to a lot of these healthcare companies is the security aspect, and so having a solution that is not only quick to establish, but can also be secured for third parties. It can be secured for BYOD, that sort of thing. Having a solution in place that can really be fortified, because the data that they use is so critical and obviously cannot get out. And so having the peace of mind that security is in place with a cellular network because of the router that they've selected or the cloud management platform that they're using is very important.
Yeah, absolutely, right. The ability to configure that network in a HIPAA compliant manner, especially if they're doing, it's one thing if they're just doing the digital signage, and absolutely that has to be segmented from a network that's doing patient data. So absolutely having that infrastructure to be able to not only configure the network in a HIPAA compliant manner, but then be able to produce the artifacts when audited to show that it is done in a HIPAA compliant manner.
And not only segmentation, but another benefit, you were talking earlier about SD-WAN and kind of the evolution of that. And one of the things that we see with modern SD-WAN are link bonding capabilities. And so when you think about something like a healthcare facility, they may be able to use link bonding where they combine a cellular connection, even with an existing wired line connection. Or, we have recently had somebody on the show that was talking about using satellite in a healthcare facility. And so being able to combine some of those links to better accommodate bandwidth, whether that's for telehealth or for other critical applications, is really an advantage. All right, so next we're going to be talking to Holly Pinero, who has a utilities story for us, so we can kind of hear how they're using cellular.
My customer is a utility company based in a major metropolitan city. They had over 200 vehicles, and their previous provider, with what limited information they would share, because they are a utility company, so they're very security conscious. They don't even want you to know what they had. They'll let you know what the problem was. And the problem was that configuration updates, a small lean IT staff, they didn't have the capability to get out to all these vehicles. So they came to our company for the solution that they'd done some research on. We did some proof of concepts. And everything worked great. Again, it's a utility company. So we started discussing some security aspects utilizing NetCloud Manager, and we ended up positioning Secure Connect. And they were actually looking at other things, but they went with that. And they've seen the value add for having that on there. Again, they're very careful. It's part of our infrastructure requirements across the United States. Mm-hmm. The utilities companies have to be as tight as they can, if not tighter. They literally said, this is incredible. We didn't realize how important it would be to have something where we done low touch, configuration, robust, coverage, everything. It's been what they expected and more. We're not trying to put cart before horse.
Right.
We're making sure that the 200 vehicles are great, their configuration, they're comfortable using, Secure Connect, the NetCloud Manager, and then we will move to the next phase.
So it sounds like now that they have a cellular solution in place with the right coverage, the best security in place, and the equipment itself, like you were saying, like their Wi-Fi would get hot and that sort of thing, they have an opportunity to take advantage of more solutions. But what are some of the specific benefits they've seen? Like, how has this impacted their IT team? And
the IT, again, they have a lean IT staff. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine with 200 vehicles having to do configurations and push them out. They just don't have the ability to do that. There's a sense of standardizing configurations across all their platforms.
So Holly was really sharing with us this use case of they have a fleet of more than 200 vehicles. And one thing I want to, kind of point out is in fleets, obviously they're not going to have an issue with wired connectivity, right? The issue a lot of the times comes down to is the cellular connectivity I have, or sometimes they're using like a MiFi hotspot. Are those things able to accommodate the environments they're in, and B, are they reliable? Are they even staying connected?
Yeah, a lot of times, having learned more about this customer, right? No customer has infinite amount of money to spend on IT stuff. That's why you get into lean IT. That's why you get into those kind of things. But a lot of times, that lack of money leads them to a more consumer type application, right? And those consumer products are not built to be left in vehicles and powered on and off, and the extreme temperatures that vehicles can be exposed to. Like, knowing who this customer is and where they operate. Yeah, they are based out of a metropolitan area, but they also service a lot of rural areas that have kind of extreme temperatures, both on the high and the low side. And so, these vehicles are out in the field where the external temperature in the summer can get in excess of 100 degrees and the temperature in the winter can get below freezing. So, they need to, that results in these consumer type solutions just failing, right? And consumer solutions typically don't have a very robust warranty either. They're built to, unfortunately in this day and age, a lot of consumer devices are built to be thrown away. And so, they end up having to spend more money to purchase new devices to replace the ones that have failed. When, if you purchase a device that's purpose built for those industrial specifications, it can last you a longer time and have that more robust connectivity because it was built specifically for those vehicle applications or rural applications where it's potentially on edge of cellular. And in those rural applications can be potentially integrated with other connectivity types like satellite.
Mm-hmm. And, Holly was mentioning that this customer is not currently using dual modem functionality, but that's something that we see a lot of times in fleets because then they have the ability to put SIM cards from two different carriers into their router, into their enterprise router. And then especially when they're going to some of these rural locations, the driver or the person that's on call, they don't even have to think about whether or not they have connectivity. The router itself is determining the best connection and making sure that that is what is currently on.
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, knowing who this customer is, right? They have a very, varied types of facilities, right? Everything from the vehicle yard to where the people are dispatched from, to hydroelectric facilities, to wind generated facilities, to even solar generated facilities, and then traditional power plants and substations that could potentially be served by private cellular. And so having that option to be able, both from a dual modem public carrier perspective, but also being able to integrate a private cellular SIM so that if they do integrate private cellular into their network, being able to seamlessly go from the private to public networks, depending on whether they're near a facility or not.
And even as they're thinking about the future and some opportunities that could come into play with cellular connectivity, I liked what they also have in place right now, especially in terms of security. They're taking advantage of what Holly was talking about, Secure Connect, which is really kind of a modern VPN solution. And so especially when you're organizing and managing large fleets, hundreds of vehicles, the ability to orchestrate those connections really simply and securely and make sure that deny by default is in place and they can really enhance their security posture just with a click, that's invaluable, particularly for a lean IT team.
Yeah, I mean, utility companies, and rightfully so, because they are the backbone of our infrastructure, are highly regulated, especially from a security perspective. So zero trust is probably extremely important to these organizations because you have to have that security first mindset to be able to protect that critical infrastructure, and I'm not just talking about the power lines or power facilities or natural gas facilities. I'm talking about all the ancillary things that go along with it, just the vehicles themselves. Imagine, having that vehicle be an attack vector into the network that has access to these critical infrastructures. So zero trust is extremely important for these companies.
Agreed. So next up, we are talking to a friend from across the world. Luke Burbett is going to talk to us about a mining customer.
So my customer is a mining customer based in Papua New Guinea, which is above Australia. The actual mine itself, it's the largest open pit copper, gold and silver mine in all of Papua New Guinea. It's actually owned by the state, majority owned by the state, and then owned by the local community as well. And so all the profits and operations go back into the community. So that's everything like infrastructure, health centres, schools, housing. So the mine supports the community. Being a mine, it's pretty hard to get to. It's located in Mount Fibulin, which is one of the biggest mountains in Papua New Guinea.
Okay.
And to reach it, you can only get there with a private airstrip or down the river, which is sometimes dry. So that's a challenge when servicing a community, and not only that, but servicing an operation. But on top of that, a lot of aging and legacy wireless infrastructure was in there prior, and because of that, there was a real issue with reliability. And because it is so remote, it's hard to troubleshoot and manage. So that was probably the big one. The other challenge was, as the mine gets bigger, from a scaling point of view, it was very difficult to scale without actually having a complete overview of the wireless network. And so that's where we came in. Yeah, so they used our, I guess, routers in branch and IoT to service all their site accommodation, town centres, and run a private LTE network to service the mine operations itself. But then on top of that, using a lot of our IoT routers to, I guess, track all the power supply, the battery levels, the gas being used, and really being able to see from very far away how the mine was operating, and being able to be proactive in scaling up as opposed to waiting for a problem to hit and then dealing with it. Well, from an operational and safety point of view, it means that we can deploy really quickly, we can grow at scale really quickly, and we have flexible deployment methods. That ability to set group configurations and then assign one grouping to accommodation A, one grouping to accommodation B, one grouping to head office, and simply able to grow that way. That was really a big benefit for the organisation. From a safety perspective, the remote management of it is super important as well. Our ruggedized routers can sit in and withstand in some of the harshest conditions in the world. Important to know, Papua New Guinea has one of the highest rainfalls in the world by country as well. So when it comes to serviceability and trying to reach these places in difficult terrain and conditions, our routers really stand up to the test of the environment. So from a safety point of view, less people out in the field servicing them, which means that there's less chance of something possibly going wrong. From a time and cost point of view, lean IT. I get it's a bit of a cliche, a bit of a catchword, but this entire mine is run by one IT operator, and they're supported by a trusted partner of ours as well. So that really, your biggest cost generally in business is your people, and with this reduction in people cost for servicing that particular mine, it means there is a reduction in operational and capital expenses. From an IT optimization point of view, I'd probably say the enhanced network performance has been critical in one of their benefits. Being able to operate, I guess, best in class has been really important to them, especially given it is a state-run project. On top of that, traffic offloading, the remote management, which I've mentioned earlier, that's critical. And once again, it is really, really remote. So very nice to be able to deal with issues, one, before they arise, but also from the seat of your couch on a laptop, which is pretty cool. And then finally, the big word at the moment is security. So the ability to segment the network and run an air-gapped network between the wireless accommodation element and the workers, and then keeping that separate from the corporate network, that's critical. Data protection is really important given it's state-run, and also better security between the end user and the infrastructure itself.
Mauricio, this story's got it all. We've got remote locations. We've got IoT. We've got sites. We've got security. We've got cloud management. We've got ruggedized routers. It's cool to hear Luke talk about all of these benefits of not just the cellular connectivity piece, but also like the enterprise equipment piece, all of these things that go into really making such a critical industry like this mining industry, especially in this location, come to fruition and operate efficiently.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, it's got everything, right? And it's got the, offering the workers and obviously the town that probably supports the mine, the ability to connect as part of the infrastructure, while being able to maintain the security of the mine and being able to offer the Wi-Fi while still being able to monitor all the IoT pieces that they mentioned, like the power monitoring and batteries and those kind of things, and not just endpoints, right? He talked about private cellular for the mine operation, right? So and security, and the other thing that kind of interests me about this, right, is that it's a government-private partnership, and like the government owns the mine and it's run by a private company that is doing all of these things to support its workers. Again, going back to choosing the right type of solution, right? You mentioned the ruggedization of the endpoints, being able to survive the place with the highest amount of rainfall in the world. Choosing those endpoints to make sure that they meet the needs and will be a solution that stands kind of the test of time there.
I think this is a really important story for IoT and for us to remember that, just because an enterprise IoT network is growing, it doesn't mean that the support staff is following suit, right? So like we heard Luke talking about, there's still just one guy and a few people helping him out, but that person has to manage, data plans and data consumption and security alerts and signal strength and activations and disconnects for hundreds of IoT devices. And he can't just dispatch a truck roll for every time something goes out. So having a solution in place like a centralized network management tool and automations and things like that can really allow a lean IT team or the one guy, to deploy and configure and troubleshoot all of these connections from anywhere, which typically will reduce operational costs, accelerate time to service, and offer a lot of insights that can really help this mining facility go faster because you have access to unique reporting and things like that as well. And then when it comes time to add more IoT, that scalability is seamless.
Yeah, right. We talk a lot about the expensive truck rolls. Well, how expensive is it when you can only get there by boat and by plane and the river dries up? Yeah. So then you can only get there by plane. Like, I can't even imagine the expense of that truck roll. And like you said, right, it doesn't matter whether it's a mom and pop shop that has maybe 3 or 4 stores or a multi-billion-dollar global company, right? The IT spend maybe scales up, but doesn't necessarily scale up to the level where you have a lot of IT people to be able to manage a network, right? So that remote troubleshooting, that remote management of that one guy on his couch, like Luke said, becomes critical to being able to maintain any IT infrastructure. And so I think regardless of the solution that you pick, that you want a solution that works together in a single plane of management and is able to easily be managed without having to, one, have multiple people, or two, have multiple people with multiple skill sets that have to swivel chair between different types of management solutions.
I will say too, I think we need to also mention that the simplicity of cellular from a management perspective is astounding, but also from an OT perspective, right? So when they're getting these new routers at the mine, I'm assuming they come in on a plane or a boat, the guy that's plugging them in or installing them may not be the guy that knows everything about connectivity. And so it has to be simple for him too, right? And cellular makes that achievable, which especially in a remote location like this is critical.
Well, yeah. I mean, I would even go so far as you don't want the guy who's managing them, installing them, right? Because these are installed in vehicles. As someone who is trained as a network engineer, and that was my previous kind of role, I don't know anything about installing a router in a vehicle. Like, I don't know anything about a vehicle electrical system, so you don't want me rooting around in there. I don't know much about battery systems, so you don't want me trying to install a router connected to a battery system. So, yeah, it has to be easy for someone who is an expertise in vehicle electrical systems or an expertise in battery or solar systems to be able to integrate this solution in there. And then the person who's the network manager or the network engineer is able to take that over. So, yeah, has to be easy to install, easy to use, easy to manage all the way around.
We love a plug and play cellular solution. All right, and finally, we caught up with Graham Everington, who's going to chat with us about one of his emergency services customers.
Yeah, so as you know, I work with our public sector and blue light customers in the UK. So today, I'll probably talk to you about some of our fire customers, fire and rescue. We probably work with sort of 60% of fire and rescue services in the UK. Oh. Predominantly with our in-vehicle solutions, so routers in vehicles on appliances, supporting fire services with CCTV coverage, with getting their jobs to their MDTs, all of that kind of thing. But what we've seen a little bit more, and what I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about today, was we've seen a kind of new use case in fire and rescue. It's probably similar in the US, but in the UK, we're actually turning off the analog phone system at the moment, so the copper wires in the ground. So we call it PSTN. A lot of fire and rescues, control and command, and their 999 calls were actually, some of the traffic was taken on PSTN lines, either primary or for resiliency. So what we found is, and we're working with multiple fire services at the moment around replacing that old PSTN kind of network with a cellular solution. To carry that traffic. So really important traffic that takes traffic from A to B, but to be allowed to fire services to, for example, HQ to tell another station to go out to a certain incident.
Okay.
So huge challenges around that because they have to do it because the service is going to be turned off. Our standard kind of branch routers or even the in-vehicle routers that are being used. So, for example, and the adapters and so on, antennas, to bring that signal in, the dual resiliency from SIMs, allowing then routers at HQ and then at site to pass that traffic from one place to another.
Okay. And what kind of benefits are the blue light services seeing from having these solutions in place?
I suppose the biggest thing from that point of view is comfort that we'll be able to carry that traffic. Mm-hmm. So those 999 calls will get to the right place. There's also the fact that we can give them that enterprise-grade, secure network. We can also do that really quickly. So rather than waiting for a fixed solution to go in, we can literally, spin up a network within 72 hours. From the customer's actual ask. So we can get that moving really quickly. We can also give them some security features around VPN and things like that so that traffic is secure and nobody can see that traffic. So it really hits the spot at the moment in the UK.
So this is kind of a unique story in that this is not necessarily a customer who's saying, well, I like my landline and I'm just kind of trying to figure out if cellular is worth it. These are customers whose existing connectivity option is going away. So now they're moving to cellular. And what a good place to move. Like if you're getting forced to try something new, cellular is a great place to start for connectivity.
Yeah, I mean, I think not just in the UK where this customer is, but I think we've seen this globally, right? How many people still even have a landline? How many businesses still have a landline, right? As people have moved from landlines to voice over IP and cellular phones, the landlines have essentially become this aging infrastructure that is a burden to those carriers who are looking to move away from that to move customers to voice over IP or voice over LTE, those kind of things. And so, yeah, largely those are starting to go away. But there are lots of life safety applications that still leverage those. Besides this customer, think about the phone lines for emergencies in elevators. Think about fire panels and security systems. Those all rely on landlines. And in places like the US and the UK, there are regulations requiring them to have that landline communication, right? So the regulations are starting to change to allow voice over IP or voice over LTE, but there still have to, these systems still only support that RJ11 connection. So they have to put in a solution that will allow it to convert from that landline to those digital solutions.
What I like in particular about this story is it really illustrates an ecosystem that can benefit from cellular. So it's not just connectivity for vehicles, it's also connectivity for these branch sites, for different stations. And then from a management perspective, that's so much easier for their IT teams. And then especially for the folks that are in the field, I mean, in an industry like emergency services, I mean, to put it frankly, you've got enough to worry about. You don't need to worry about if your connection is staying up. You've literally got lives on the line. So as Graham put it, they have the comfort that we can carry their traffic. That has got to be such a relief for somebody in an industry like that.
Well, and the other thing is, right, that you mentioned is like, it's not just vehicles, it's their fixed locations as well. Mm-hmm. So I think in the days of lean IT, like we've kind of talked about carrying through all of these use cases, it becomes so much easier to have a singular solution that works both in vehicles and in fixed locations as well as remote locations, right? Graham didn't mention it, but knowing a little bit about how the police services work in the UK, they have a significant fleet of cameras, CCTV cameras, right? And so this is a solution that could also be used for those, as well as traffic light systems or other smart systems that are integrated in for, especially in the police services, for that operational intelligence, especially during an incident or something involving public safety, where they can are able to integrate with the CCTVs and see those live and all those things. So, sorry, rambling a little bit, but going back, bringing it all back together. In lean IT, having one system that can accommodate all those different use cases just makes that management so much easier and so much more efficient for those lean IT teams.
And especially as these types of use cases are moving from, and I was thinking about this too when we heard from Luke and the mining and how they had sort of this aging infrastructure. It's the same case here, right? They have this aging infrastructure that's now going away. And as they're upgrading to these newer solutions, they can take advantage of newer features. And one that we talked about a little bit earlier was some of the link bonding features. And I'm thinking about, in the use cases that Graham was talking about, they may have sites that are choosing to rely on things like flow balancing to make sure, just to help balance out their costs a little bit between like metered and non-metered data plans based on where they are. Or they might be still aggregating links depending on if they're streaming video like you were talking about, or if it's just like a smaller application that doesn't need that much bandwidth. And so I think that this upgrade is really upgrading them to a lot more possibilities that they can take advantage of in their future as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, all, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this look into how cellular networks transform industries, please rate and subscribe to What's Your Signal wherever you listen to podcasts.